Good morning or afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're joining us. I'm Leah Teague. I'm the Associate Dean at Baylor Law School, but today I welcome you to the last class session for our Leadership Engagement and Development class for our 2021 winter term, which is the reason for the seemingly odd beginning and end time. On our quarter system, our class schedule is such that this class begins at 10:50 and ends 70 minutes later at noon. So while this started out to be as our one of our speakers said right before this, almost a class reunion of sorts, for the purpose of sharing with our class, we decided that this was just too good. These speakers are too fabulous. The program is too good. The topic too important to limit it just to our leadership class. So we open it up to our other Baylor Law students. They'll be getting professional development credit for this program. And then we decided, oh, why stop there? Let's open this up to lawyers who will be able to get, because we have qualified and we have sought and obtained credit, not just any credit, but that very coveted ethics credit. It's been approved by the Texas Continuing Legal Education program. So in the chat, there'll be placed information on how you claim that credit if that brings you here today. And we know that there are others of you, perhaps because you're a tremendous fan, as I am, of one or more of these fabulous speakers. But our numbers have grown to over 300. I don't know if we're at 350, if we're climbing even higher than that. So that is the reason for the last minute switch from our normal class session, which would have been a meeting and very open, to this webinar. Now, I do hate that it's the webinar. We're going to be relegated to questions. Will need to be through the chat. That is part of the switch in the dynamics. But we are so proud to bring you this program. We know that these speakers are going to help move the conversation forward. And what conversation am I talking about? We at Baylor Law are part of a growing national movement in legal education to be much more intentional in creating an atmosphere in which our students understand the importance of the leadership roles that they will be expected to play and in society, and the many opportunities that they will have because of their education, because of their training, and because of that license that they will gain to enter our as a noble member of this profession and really to have an opportunity to make a difference. So I want to start with just a little bit about law schools, leadership, and what it means. Without a doubt, law schools have always trained students to be advocates, to give voice, persuasive voice to the powerless and to the disadvantaged. We also prepare our students to be problem solvers. Society needs more lawyers who will provide moral guidance to find solutions that build relationships and strengthen communities. As lawyers, we are called to be peacemakers. Our law students should be inspired to want to resolve conflicts in ways that can lead to reconciliation and more harmonious and productive futures. And as keepers of the law, we are charged as citizens with special responsibilities. We are charged with moving this society to that ever elusive, more perfect union that our founding fathers described for us. So this has been the truth of the history of lawyers. Lawyers have led in not just in our local communities, we do that well, but also led the nation in times of difficulty and in times of uncertainty. So this latest movement in legal education is to embrace that obligation that we have in training the future leaders in this country and to prepare students who are not just lawyers, but they're lawyer leaders who are ready, willing, and able to serve not only their clients with honor and integrity, but also to step up within their communities. So thank you for joining us on this journey. I'm not going to waste precious time with extensive introductions because that could take our entire 70 minutes. We are putting in the chat, we're going to drop in some links to more formal bios, but I do want to share with you, just a little bit about each of them. But first, I'm going to tell you about this program and how this came about. Um, we have just finished, and it's now in print, a textbook, Fundamentals of Lawyer Leadership. And as we were creating that textbook, our chapter 22, we titled it The Complete Lawyer, Service and Significance. And we started that chapter with the quote that was part of our program description, in which he described the important role of lawyers, dedicated lawyers, devoted to the profession of law, of high moral and ethical standards. They will always occupy leadership positions in society. So Leon Jaworski, as well as our three speakers, are shining examples of the many Baylor lawyers who are not only experts in the areas in which they practice, but they have also become to be known as wise counselors, trusted advisors to their clients and to the many, many, many organizations that they have served and continue to serve. That's what makes them celebrated and effective leaders. But none of this would be possible without their commitment to doing it the right way, making honorable decisions when no one is looking, and even when it might call for some type of self-sacrifice. This is what we mean when we use that term complete lawyers or whole lawyers. And that's our desire and our mission at Baylor Law, that all of our Baylor lawyers will pursue a life as a complete and whole lawyer who is dedicated to service and striving for a life of significance. So with that, let me do a quick introduction of our three complete lawyers. Two of them share the same birthday. They can choose to disclose that or not later. They're each recognized and celebrated for their contributions as leaders in organizations across this nation and in their communities. Each gives their time generously to all of those who know them, including Baylor Law. We're the beneficiaries of that. I'm going to start with Fred Mcclure, because I think perhaps maybe he is in their life journey. He was one of he had maybe the earliest significant leadership roles. Goes way back to high school, and his involvement through his community and then influence of his father. FFA, if you're in Texas, you understand that means Future Farmers of America. He rose in ranks very quickly. He was president of the state organization. He became secretary of the national organization. When he was at Texas A&M, he was the student body president. So he has always been a trailblazer in many ways, in part because in those three positions, not only was he recognized for his excellence in skills and character, but he was the first Black individual to hold those prestigious offices. So those leadership positions he recognizes were a catalyst to his later positions, which included serving for three presidents, Ford, Reagan, and Bush 41. He worked in the Senate. He's been a managing partner of an international law firm on numerous boards. The list goes just on and on and on. He currently serves as the executive director of Leadership Initiative at Texas A&M. He is joined by Jerry Clements. She is chair emeritus of Locke Lord. Some of you know her as also a former chair of the Baylor Board of Regents. She served her firm in that leadership position for 11 years. She took it from a well-respected, but not all that large, Texas law firm to one of international prominence. And she did that through mergers and by judicious hiring and growth using her leadership skills. I'm sure you don't know that growing up, she was one time a baton twirler and has the title of Miss Majorette of Texas. Now, Fred, I also know that you were the drum major for the FFA and their national band. So again, such commonality links between these two. She has been recognized as a top litigator in Texas and across the nation. She is one of the most influential women attorneys in the country. As chair, it's impressive enough that she chaired that large international firm, but to do it as a small group among the 5% of women who occupied those very important, prestigious positions, she's just amazing. She's a marvel. And again, her list of positions and honors just goes on and on. Kirk Watson is currently the founding dean, the first dean of the University of Houston's Hobby School of Public Affairs. So he is now splitting his time between Houston and Austin, which is where he's lived since he graduated from law school. In that community, he has served as mayor and senator, and again, just in so many ways. He's the guy you go to if you want any information about Austin and who to talk to. All three of these individuals are so well connected. Because of his past as a Texas senator and his current role as dean, we have respectfully and lovingly come up with his new title. We now call him Deanator. So feel free to join me in calling him Deanator Watson next time you see him. Kirk was also an early leader here at Baylor Law School. He was an editor-in-chief, and it doesn't matter what law school we're talking about, that is one of the highest student leadership positions in any law school in the land. Early in his career, he was elected by all of the Texas young lawyers across this state to be president of that prestigious Texas Young Lawyers Association. That is a position of honor that many Baylor lawyers hold, and including the wife of my colleague and co-conspirator in all leadership things, Stephen Rispoli. His wife, Janine Rispoli, is currently the president-elect for TYLA and will be holding that position next year. But back to Kirk, he has continued to serve and to lead throughout his life. And I so respect his commitment to educating, training, and mentoring future public servants and difference makers, because that's so important to him. So I will add that all three of these, in terms of balanced individuals, they are all committed to their families. They spend time with their good friends, which is what brings us back to this threesome. We're going to start our questions, and we're going to start with sort of talking about the three of you, this friendship that goes way back. What brought you together? What has kept you together? And what do you think, as we begin to talk about leadership, the impact that has in anyone's leadership role, these relationships that you build and maintain?
Who do you want to go first?
I will let, I'm just, at this point, I'm here just to facilitate this conversation between three good friends who are amazing leaders.
Well, I'll kick off by saying the way we got to know each other was we all started, I think Fred and I both started in February of 1979 at Baylor Law School. And then Jerry started, she came in the summer session, whenever that started on the quarter system. So we were as contemporaries as you can be, going through school at the same time, practice court at the same time and all that. We were on different teams together. All three of us were on the national trial competition team. Fred and I were on a moot court. We were moot court partners at one point. Jerry was, you mentioned editor-in-chief. Jerry was also an editor-in-chief of the Law Review. So the bottom line is we were all doing stuff with each other all through law school. The way I think we became such good friends is, first of all, I think Baylor Law School helps you in that regard, because it's small enough that you really do get to know the people that you're in classes with. And it's intense enough that you're always looking for help and assistance from somebody. But the other thing is, I always admired these two because they were leaders. I mean, when they walked into a room, everybody knew they were there, and they were somebody that everybody looked up to. And as somebody that aspired to be a leader and wanted to do that kind of thing, these were two people that I looked to and watched the way they handled themselves and what they did. And we've just we were fast friends that the good news is we're the kind of friends that you may not talk to each other for years, and then you get together and it's just a rush of kind of keeping up.
Yeah, I'll add one. Go ahead, Fred.
Go, Jerry. No, go, Jerry. Go.
No, I was just going to add that, yes, we all got to know each other in 1979, and Leah alluded to this a moment ago. Fred and I can't be in the same room without telling this story. As we started going through law school and became members of the national trial team, one day Fred and I discovered that we had the same birthdays, February 2nd. I won't tell you what year because it's getting too many, but what was even more interesting about that is we discovered that we were both born in Fort Worth at the same hospital on the same day. And so fast forward 20 something years, and here we are, trial partners, and I guess knowing each other since literally the day we were born in some way. So, but Kirk's right. It's just when you're in the trenches, and all of you law students out there know this, particularly at Baylor, particularly during practice court, you get to be fast friends and just people that you can count on, for the rest of your lives.
One of the things I'd add to that, Jerry, is that I'm really fearful for what has happened because of what we're experiencing now with COVID, as a result of the fact that students do not have the opportunity to spend as much quality time together as we were lucky to do, specifically with the size of Baylor's law school. And so the other piece that Kirk alluded to, Kirk was the only guy amongst the three of us, for example, who really had Baylor relationships because he was a Baylor undergrad. You and I came there from different institutions, different from Baylor. So learning about not only what we were facing in terms of law school, all scared to death, basically, but to learn about what it was like to live in Waco and also to be a student at Baylor Law School. So we had a lot of extra learning to do. And so those people who graduated from undergraduate school at Baylor, I think, were helpful to inculcating those of us who were outsiders into the process.
So the three of you have talked about the fact you respected each other and you identified one another, the other two at least, not admitting to your own leadership, that you recognize them as leaders. And back then, without a doubt, law schools didn't talk about intentionally being leaders and training for leaders. And that's something that we're trying to correct. So talk a bit about what you think that would have done had there been more intentionality back in the day, or bringing it forward. Why is, in your opinion, that so important that law schools include leadership development in what we do?
So I'll start on this one. You're right, Leah. When we were in law school, it was basically survive, all of our courses, particularly con law under Professor Gwynn and real property under Dean McSwain. And, I'll mention here too that I don't think any of the three of us had lawyers in our families. Fred came from St. Augustine, Kirk came from Saginaw, I came from Fort Worth. And for us, this was all just something that I think was very surreal at first. But we focused on our studies and that sort of thing without any idea that there were opportunities ahead for the kinds of things that we've been able to do because of our degree from Baylor Law School. I think the fact that now Baylor and other law schools are focusing on leadership is a fantastic thing, because I do think that lawyer leaders are so important to not only our various businesses, whether we're in the law business or corporate law departments or academia. I just think that actually having an intentional focus on this really brings it to the forefront much earlier and helps develop those important qualities that lawyers can really add to society on, not just being good lawyers, not just being good trial lawyers or corporate lawyers, but actually making a difference in the world in one form or another. So personally, I'm thrilled to see it. It's something that we certainly didn't really think about, as I recall, because we were just trying to get through practice court basically. But those are my thoughts.
And if I add to that, you know, there was kind of I agree with Jerry, you know, none of us came from backgrounds that had lawyers, but at least one of the things you picked up immediately was when a law school puts the kind of expectation on you that a law school ought to, that implicit in what you're going to do as a lawyer is you're going to be kind of a holder of certain things. You're going to be the person that people go to ask, what are the rules? What is the legal way you're going to go about achieving things? How do we make and this word is key, the justice system really work? Well, implicit in all of that, of course, is the fact that you're leading in society. You may not have been saying it at the time, but it's a key part of what Jerry and what you, Leah, in your initial comments talked about. But it's true that one of the things that was missing was the more explicit part of that. And how do you take the training you get, including the discipline? I mean, we've all already, the three of us have already mentioned the discipline necessary to get through law school, which I think is a good thing. But how do you turn that into actually leading? How do you turn in the pursuit of justice into and truth to actually leading? And so I think it's important that now be more explicit and there be more of a talk about how you use those skills and add to what is being taught so that there will be additional skills to allow for that leadership.
What I also think that you'll find is, and Jerry and Kirk both can probably attest to this, is that once you get out of law school and start whatever pursuit you choose in terms of either the profession or otherwise, once you get involved in local community activities, local church activities, and those kinds of things, people will always turn to you for your sort of advice and counsel. Once you get suckered into being on the hospital board or being on the local Rotary board, people will always turn to you and say, it almost always comes out this, well, Fred, you're a lawyer, what do you think? Because there is some perception, hopefully rightfully so, a perception that because of the training that we went through at Baylor in terms of being disciplined, in terms of analysis, in terms of our ability to take difficult situations and problems and circumstances and distill them down to a set of facts or statements, if you will, that could be understandable and easily articulated. You know, ultimately, in terms of this leadership thing, the question becomes whether anything or anyone is better off because of your presence, because of what you've done. That's where I think we begin to make a difference because the focus is not on the person who is serving as the leader, but the focus begins to focus on the folks whom we serve. And that is what is expected of us, I think, in our profession.
So if Jerry and Kirk will build on that, because what he's basically saying is the definition of leadership is not a position. It's more of honestly a way of life, a way of approaching your time, your talents, your resources. How do you give? Your thoughts on that broader concept of leadership?
Well,
I'll just
go ahead,
add,
go ahead.
yeah, sorry, Kirk. I'll just say that one of the great things about developing lawyers as leaders is lawyers, from the moment they walk into law school, begin being taught about having this core value system. We call it legal ethics. It is at the heart of, and soul of everything a lawyer is taught. You know, you learn the law, you learn the rules, but really within all of that, the foundational core value of a lawyer is ethics. And so if you can have a person that comes to leadership role that has this core value built in concept of ethics, what's right, what's not right, who your duties are, that concept of the duties that you owe in various circumstances, that is such a strong foundation in my view for leadership, because leaders that are not lawyers don't necessarily have that. And I'm not saying anything bad about non-lawyer leaders, because there's a lot of great non-lawyer leaders, but it is a unique concept to have that core value of ethical conduct and a prism of, is this the right thing to do? Is this the ethical thing to do? What are my obligations? What are my duties as a leader? Because one of the key things that I found in leadership is people have to trust you. Trust is critical for a leader. If people don't trust you, they're not going to follow you. And that's just how it is. And so in order to be trusted, they have to know that you're going to do the right thing in every circumstance, not for yourself, but for the group that you're leading.
And I think that's extremely well said. And the only thing I could add to it is that I go back to the concept in the ethic that or a key ethic that she's talking about there is that the system of justice has essentially been handed over to lawyers. So, and implicit in that, a key part of the concept of justice is that there has to be an empathy for the people that you're dealing with. When Jerry talks about how you create trust, one of the quickest ways to create trust is to truly be an empathetic person and be willing and able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, especially as we talk about things like ethics and justice. And so I think that's a key part of how people ought to try to develop themselves, is to have a sense of empathy. In this day and age, we label each other so much. We put a label on people and then we act like we don't have any responsibility to ever hear them again. Because once we get a label on them, okay, I now know everything I need to know about you because I've slapped a label on you. But what that does is it immediately sucks the empathy out of the relationship because there's no effort to know anything more about them. So I think that part of that is, as Jerry says, is in terms of trying to develop trust. And as Fred says, are you going to leave someone better off? You have to have that empathy. You have to be willing to listen. And more than listen, you have to be willing to hear. And then I think a key element of leadership is you got to be biased toward acting. You can't just hear and listen and then be paralyzed by the fear that you'll fail or the fear that somebody will have a better idea than you. Once you have listened and heard, a good leader, if they're going to achieve what Fred has set as the standard, which I think is a pretty good standard, and that is, are people better off? You got to act.
People I found will forgive you for not being the leader that you should be, but they won't forgive you for being the leader that you claim to be. So you're going to have to figure out where you're going to come down in terms of what you owe back as a result of what is expected of you. And on the integrity front, if integrity ever stops being the top priority of a leader, you are beginning a slippery slope that is going to result in an ethical collapse, period. It'll be over.
Very good point. Let's build more on that. Advice to law students and lawyers and others in our audience today about what does it take to be an effective leader. Kirk, you've started us off: trust, empathy, bias towards action. All of this has to have as a foundation integrity and honor. What other characteristics, what other skills, and recognizing that in today's conversation about leadership development, we don't talk about leaders are born or not. It's a matter of how do we develop each and every one of us in terms of working on characteristics and skills and approaches that will make us even more effective. So what else is advice to our students and lawyers, things they need to work on?
One thing I'd add is the importance of having a disciplined plan. A disciplined plan that also allows you to try to effectuate that plan, but with eyes wide open to realize that if circumstances change, that you have the ability to adjust to those changed circumstances. It's like whether you're running a political campaign, whether you're running a business, whether you're running a law firm, we need to have a plan that we follow. And in the event that circumstances arise which cause a need for reevaluation, reevaluate, change, move in another direction. You got to have eyes wide open all the time. It's like, let's say you're in the middle of a trial. I shouldn't be talking about this since I haven't done a whole lot of trial work, but you're in the middle of a trial and all of a sudden you get new information that totally changes the thrust of the direction that you were trying to go. How do you evaluate, use, balance that information? The same thing I think happens in leadership.
The way I phrase what, sorry, go ahead, Jerry.
No, you go ahead, Kirk. I'll go last.
The way I phrase what Fred was just saying on having a plan is, in my opinion, good leaders need to be willing, and good leadership requires that you're willing to protect the process. And part of that process has to include collaboration. In my view, leaders have to practice, because it's hard to do this sometimes, particularly when people are angry or they're not at their best, they're unhappy. But you have to practice hearing and not ignoring some of that. But once you, as part of that process, giving voice to others' voices so that you can make it part of what you need to achieve. You also, part of that planning has to be that you're willing to recognize you're not going to make everybody happy. You're just not going to make everybody happy every time. And if you try, you're either going to make somebody the most powerful person on earth, or at least in that little universe, or that universe you're working in, because they're going to get to say no and kill everything. Consensus is not, as I found sometimes in Austin government, it's not, as some people want it to be, 100% agreement. You just can't get there, because it also might not be workable. So you at some point you have to move on. That's kind of my bias toward action. But again, it's that planning, that process that Fred's talking about that needs to be protected. And I'll mention one other thing about that. And that too often, and I think we're doing it too much today, and a lot of the people that are in leadership positions, we demand our concept of perfection. And that's not protecting the process. The process is how do you create the hope that somebody will want to follow you on by being empathetic and by listening and planning. But if you're demanding your concept of perfection on everything, then that's really not leadership. That's trying to dictate a result.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to that, because I think those were all great points. A leader has to be able to have a vision. And, we talk a lot about that vision thing, but it's really important. And I think one of the things that good leaders do is they recognize that initially not everybody's going to have the same vision as you. So you're going to wake up in the middle of the night with the idea about, I'll just speak from my context, which is law firm leadership. As we all know, lawyers are somewhat difficult to manage, and especially in a law firm where it's a partnership, it's not a pyramid structure as a corporation might be. So that consensus building and communication and spending time to get from A to B with bringing people along with you is absolutely critical, not just in the law firm concept, but really pretty much in every aspect of leadership I can think of. So the ability to develop a vision, communicate your vision, and then the call to action, implement your vision, is really important. And to implement your vision, you've got to be a persuasive advocate. You guys in the Baylor Law School are learning persuasive advocacy. And that's going to serve you well, not just in the courtroom, but in leadership roles. Because what you really want to do is you want to set forth that vision, persuade others to follow that vision because they trust you, so that they are anxious and excited about implementing your vision. And that, to me, is the real important qualities of leaders. Fred alluded to this, but I'll just put a finer point to it. A good leader will stand up and admit when you've made a mistake. And that is part of that critical element of trust, because unless a leader is willing to admit that they've made a mistake, they went down a wrong path, and then correct it, because things change, new things come to light, you get it, stand up, be willing to say, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, we're going to go a different route, I listened to you all, you were right, let's think about this instead. That is so important for leadership and that whole element of trust that I'm talking about.
And Jerry, I think that's so important for our students coming in. You know, some of them come in with this image of lawyers as just these tough advocates, you know, win at all cost, and you know, no bars, do what you have to do. And yet the three of you are talking about the need to build consensus, the need to develop trust in your relationships. So to a law student, young lawyer who, you know, maybe some of them haven't had the benefit of mentors, and we'll talk about mentors in just a second, to help them talk a little bit more about that, how you dance that balance between being tough and an advocate, and yet understanding that for us to move forward, we do have to reach out and build consensus and work together collaboratively.
Well, look, winning is great. The three people on this panel are people that I know like to win and hate to lose, because I've seen them in action and I've seen the success that they've had over the years by being winners. But winning at all costs is not a long-term strategy. It goes back to that initial point we were talking about, ethics and integrity as core values of lawyers. If you lose that, if that piece somehow gets out of balance or out of whack and the winning becomes more important than the core value of ethics, you are not going to be a very good lawyer, and you may not be a lawyer at all, but you're certainly not going to be a leader. So just know that you're going to lose sometimes. You're going to lose cases, you're going to lose elections, you're going to lose job opportunities. But so long as you can know in your own heart that you are doing it the right way, you're going to be a winner in the long run. And that's really the importance of your reputation as a person of honor and a person of good ethics and integrity is so much more important than winning a lawsuit not the right way, or doing something that is just is in your heart, you know, is not right. It sounds corny, but I don't know how else to say it.
Well, Jerry, let me say it this way. Doing the right thing may be hard, but it's not complicated. It's hard, it's difficult, it creates conflict, but it's not complicated to make the right decision.
You
Well
know,
said.
that is so, he's so right about that. You know, I remember I carried the bill that changed the oath of for lawyers. That we passed the bill that, and the governor signed the bill that changed the oath to require that there be civility. And I can remember at the time when I first laid that out in committee, people looking at me like, "What are you talking about? Lawyers aren't supposed to be civil. What are you doing, Watson?" But it was kind of disappointing that we needed to do that. I think sometimes we hold the adversarial system up as such the way to do things that we lose sight of the fact that it's really supposed to be about getting to truth. And and create the adversarial system at its core is meant to get to truth by allowing for better hearing. In fact, we call the things that we do in the courtroom hearings. Now, we also call things like, you know, in front of the Austin City Council on any given Thursday, they have these things called public hearings where there ain't nobody hearing nothing. But the point I'm trying to make is that just because we call it an adversarial system doesn't mean we can't try to create and find new ways to hear each other. And I think, frankly, that's part of what we've seen in the growth of the mediation and arbitration process. And we can apply that in other leadership situations by trying to create new and different ways to hear. And one of my rules of life is try to create new and different constituencies and don't create unnecessary enemies. Just because I disagree with Fred on an issue and we may go toe to toe, really fight it out, let's do it in a way where just for me to win doesn't mean he really has to lose. And in politics today, that's, you know, you got to destroy the other side. It's not enough just to win. And what that means is you create unnecessary enemies, and the next time you may not have somebody you can work with. And I think that's a key part of what we ought to be trying to do.
Leah, can I just add one thing to that? You know, we've heard a lot of talk this week about unity, and that's great. That's wonderful. But, you know, Kirk alluded to this. You're never going to get 100% consensus on everything. And one of the great things about this country is we've never really been unified. There's always been two or more political parties with differing views. So you're never going to get unanimity on these issues that people feel strongly about, but you can get what Kirk alluded to, and that is civility. So if we can have civility, then we may not have 100% unity, but we're going to come a lot closer to having a country, an organization, a group of people that will listen to one another in a way that will allow change and good things to happen and to achieve results rather than just be deadlocked and yelling at each other all the time. And a good leader knows that and recognizes that and understands there's going to be at least two sides to every issue, but more than that. And the key is, how are you going to be able to get most of the people together on the issues that they can agree on in a civil way? We're not going to have 100% unity ever, but we are capable, I think, still of civility. And lawyer leaders certainly can be the start of that in a way that people can feel better about where we ultimately get to and respect it.
Jerry, along that line, as I think back to my former job, working for one of the presidents, dealing with that unhinged bunch up in Washington, D.C. under our Capitol. One of the dumb things that I think leaders do is sometimes erring on the side of making issues personal. And so I guess my dumb thing is that one of the dumb things is that leaders start making issues personal. It's not, you know, you get beyond the question of, you're asking, the question's not who did it or who broke it or who isn't doing it right. The question is, what are we going to have to do differently to be able to get to the solution that embraces the civility that Kirk was talking about, and that allows us to bridge some of the divide, because you're not going to get the whole load. It just won't happen. And we have to move to a point where compromise is no longer a dirty word.
You're absolutely right about that. But we also have to recognize that we are all humans. Our audience, all of us are humans. And there are times when we do the dumb thing. We let something get to us in a way as a leader we should not, or we just flat make a bad decision. So are you each willing to kind of talk about a failure that you had, or a strategy for all of us as we find ourselves needing to move in a different direction, recover from something that, gosh, at the time we just, oh goodness, shouldn't have done that one.
Sure. I hate to be the one that starts, but when we start talking about failures, but I ought to jump out there because I bet I've got more. Let me, yeah, the example, I'll give a quick example. And one of it, the example I'm going to give is not modeling the system in such a way where you take into account what unintended consequences might be. And you can learn this the hard way, right? I can point to a number of examples where I was doing, at the moment, I was doing what was the right thing on an issue. And I was doing even what the community, and we had pretty good consensus, right? We didn't have 100%, obviously, but we had real good consensus. But by making the decision that that we made at the time, and 2020 hindsight means something, but when you then look back on it, you think, I should have paid greater attention to what the unintended consequences were. And I'll give an example. In Austin suffered from a series of things in East Austin that were a clear part of environmental racism that needed to be corrected. But when we did that, when we did some of those things, what that resulted in were you changed the dynamic, and it allowed for, or it created, I guess, a desire. It made it easier and better place for people to live. And so what happened was it added to the gentrification and the displacement of people that had fought for years to improve their living conditions, and then are now suffering, or not getting the clear benefit of that, and are now suffering from another problem. So the failure of that, if it's a failure, was the inability to also figure out how to best address any unintended consequences of the process.
And I'll go next. I think for me, this and a lot of leaders, you have to be out front, you have to lead, but you cannot get too far out front of your constituency. And so this goes back to what I was talking about earlier and what we've all talked about, and that is if you try to push something without the proper amount of communication, listening, empathy, understanding, taking into account the need to maybe make a few changes, tweak the plan here and there, but you just push forward. I confess I did this early on in my leadership days. It's not going to work. It's just not. People are going to resist you, and you're not going to achieve what you want to achieve. So a willingness to spend the time to get to the place you want to be is really critical in leadership. I can't stress that enough. A lot of leaders tend to have an idea and just move right to it, but you've got to bring people along. And early on in my career, my objective was to grow our firm from being a 4-office Texas firm, basically, to being an international law firm with offices not only in Texas, but throughout the US and in important international markets as well. And I was able to do that, but not without some early stumbles and just basically falling flat on my face falls at the beginning of all that. But I learned from that. So that's my other piece of advice. Once you fall down, and you will fall down, get up, dust yourself off, learn the lessons, and then don't ever forget those lessons.
And I've got a couple that I'll share. One going back a long time, really, in my career. And one of those situations where things kind of got out of hand and you didn't have the ability to control as many factors as you thought you were able to control. And a failure to recognize that resulted in one of the most disappointing parts of my career. It was at the beginning of the Bush administration, and You're hearing all this talk now about how many people were confirmed before the president was sworn in and all that kind of stuff. It's so all over the place that it really doesn't make that much difference. But this particular one was a late one, and it was a late one in the president's national security team. It was the Secretary of Defense, and it was the Secretary of Defense who happened to be the guy who gave me my chance to go to Washington in the first place, John Tower. And so dealing with not being able to read the tea leaves sufficiently to be able to ensure the confirmation of the guy who gave me my break in politics was one of the most, heart-rendering experiences of my life. What it taught me in that process was that my tea leaf reading needed to be a little bit better and more refined, and that I could not put as much faith in what I thought were friendships that the senator had built up those many years, and not being able to articulate that in such a fashion that we could change enough minds so that we could get Senator Tower confirmed. That was a big readjustment, because that was sort of like the first thing out of the bag when I had this new job working as a president's lobbyist. Real forward to my law firm days, when I re-entered the profession and was working, running our Washington, D.C. office. It was during that period of time where law firms were cutting back as a result of the fact that the economy was taking a hit. This was the 2008, 2009 timeframe. And we sort of had the mini recession going on, and we had to get rid of people. And the difficulty associated with changing the lifestyles of individuals as a result of factors out of your control makes it really, really tough to be in a leadership position. And dealing with issues such as who you should have gone to bat for, who you didn't bat for enough in trying to make those ultimate decisions was a really, really tough role to play. And lessons were learned consistently in that process, because everybody's circumstance was different. So, humility, the ability to empathize, the ability to realize that lives were at stake makes it tough.
Yeah, and in all of your stories, put this in perspective for our students in terms of leadership development. Evidence of the grit that you each had that vision, had that goal to accomplish, and the grit that it took to see it out. But then also the growth mindset to look at it from different perspectives and to reevaluate and to shift and to adapt and maybe go in a different direction. And then the resilience just to keep going after. And Jerry, thank you for admitting, because we've all done it, fall flat on our face and be able to pick ourselves up and to move on. I want to shift just a minute to talk about mentors. I guess many of us worry that, especially in law firms today, with such emphasis on billable hours, that the lack of mentors. So talk about your early mentors. And what I've been doing is kind of incorporating some questions from the chat. So thank you, audience, for providing us with those questions. But one of them said, leadership positions, were they thrust upon you, such as a mentor sort of said, you're going to do this? Or did you seek them out? And really, what's the role of a mentor? Advice to lawyers and law students.
I'll start from the law firm's perspective, a large law firm, which can be challenging. I had two wonderful mentors that I always mention. Morris Harrell, who is the epitome of a Baylor lawyer, and somebody that took me under his wing back in 1981 and let me be his helper when there weren't a lot of women in the courtroom at that time, particularly in the kind of litigation areas that I wanted to do, and defended me, because I know at least one client who told him that he didn't want any women working on his legal team. And Morris, I heard later from someone else, told him, well, if he didn't want me, Jerry, working on his legal team. Then he wasn't going to get Morris to work on his legal team either. And that worked out really well for me because they clearly wanted Morris Harrell on their legal team. So to have somebody like that fights for you and has confidence and faith in you and judges you on your abilities and skills and character and not other things is really critical to a career. The other mentor for me was Harriet Myers, not a Baylor lawyer, but we'll forgive her for that. She had other successes in life. But Harriet is still a partner at Locklord, and she did thrust leadership jobs on me when I was resisting them. Early on in my career, all I wanted to do was go try cases and win lawsuits. But she let me know that there's other important parts of being a well-rounded lawyer and an important contributor to a law firm. So mentorship is really critical. I think these days there's more of a focus on it. This is the good news for all you guys, that there's more of a focus on it now than there used to be when we were coming up in the law firm world, because back then it was just kind of throw you out there and hope you do well. But there's a new focus on that. And I think law firms, good law firms, recognize the importance of formal and informal mentoring.
What I felt fortunate that right out of law school, I got to work for Judge Sam Johnson, who was on the Fifth Circuit and was a consummate public servant. I mean, he had been district attorney, he had been a district judge, he had formed one of the states, if not the first, one of the first pro bono legal services operations down in the Houston area. He moved from Hill County down there, and then he ran for the Court of Appeals and Supreme Court and all that. So it was wonderful to get to spend a year with him, watching how much he talk about empathy. This was a guy that had empathy for everyone, and and then in the law practice, Frank Douglas was about as close as I said this at one point. It was, for me, that was about as close to practicing law with my daddy and him not being really my daddy as a guy could come. And I felt strongly about that. And that leads me to my advice to both lawyers and law students. As a law student, look for the person that you would like to be more like, and go volunteer to be a part of what they're doing. I got to carry Frank Douglas's bags in the places that, he was just going, and I drive his car and do those kinds of things because I wanted to be around the man. And I learned just watching him with people was a great lesson. And I think that's part of what Jerry's saying with the two tremendous mentors that she just mentioned. And lawyers that are in those law firms, pay attention and ask somebody to come with you. Reach out and mentor and invite them, because what particularly Frank used to do that with me, but what Jerry's talking about, Morris Harrell and Harriet Myers, of course, I kind of Harriet's a mentor of mine too. So but they reached out and pulled you, and so lawyers do that for these young people that come into your law firms, because you'll make them more rounded lawyers, but they'll be better leaders.
And I mentioned my guy a few minutes ago when I mentioned Senator Tower. Senator Tower, before he was elected to the Senate, after getting beat by LBJ, he had been a school teacher and taught political science at Midwestern University up in Wichita Falls. And he ran his Senate staff in sort of the same fashion. Maybe we could call it the Socratic method. I think it was like trial by fire, which is another way to describe it. But basically, I went to work for him, and he hired me because of, a little degree in ag economics and a little bit of knowing something about agriculture, and he let me do agricultural legislative work for him. But what it basically amounted to was he threw me into the pond, and he, basically sink or swim. This is going to be a learning experience for you. I think you're, intellectual enough to be able to do the right thing, but I want to see how you work and live in this process. And that's the way he taught all of us. in terms of working for him. But I think in a broader sense, since much of my career has been working for elected leaders, most of them, all of them fall into a mentor sort of relationship because of what the expectations are, whether you're advising a senator, advising a CEO of a corporation, advising a president of the United States. The responsibility is for you to get it right, to give them the best benefit of your knowledge and your expertise and your ability to evaluate facts and explain it and express it to them in such a fashion that the elected officials can make a decision. I learned a lot from a lot of those guys that I worked for because of the way I saw them engage in the decision-making process. As for the practice of law, when I first got out of law school, this guy named Joe Reynolds, who also was a Baylor lawyer, basically grabbed me when I joined his law firm. And, it's kind of one of these things where he would throw you also into the pond, but he also grabbed you by the nape of your neck, if you will, and dragged you along the stuff. He was kind of one of those old school lawyers like Douglas and like Morris, where it's like, this is something that Fred needs to be exposed to. So Fred, you're on this one with me. I remember one time we had gone to this trial and he had let me sit with him at the counsel's table. And like the night before the end of the trial, the night before, I hadn't said a word the entire time I was sitting there at counsel's table. And the night before, we're back at the office after the trial and court adjourned. He goes like, so Fred, I've decided you're going to do the closing argument tomorrow. I'm not going to do it. And it's like, I'm going to do what? You can imagine what my night was like trying to prepare for that. And Joe just laid it on me and said, okay, son, it's time for you to get in. I know what I know what you should be able to do. This is your chance.
And as a good Baylor lawyer, you rose to the occasion without a doubt.
I did. We won.
Awesome. Well, I wasn't going to ask, just in case.
The judge liked my closing argument. Let me put it that way.
Wonderful. Well, we are quickly and sadly approaching the end of our time, but I do want to wrap up with some questions from the chat. And one of them, I'm going to read the question. Any advice to those who never desired or sought leadership, rather those who sought to be good soldiers? And as Fred, as you were talking, I mean, you were a good soldier. Each of you have played that role of being a good soldier. And I think the first thing I would suggest is, as a good soldier, in our expanded definition of what it means to be a good leader, you are a leader within your ranks. And then, you're in training for additional opportunities. So that's one question. There have been questions about building relationships, and Fred Mcclure, I have come to understand you are like Kevin Bacon. I don't know how many degrees there are from knowing you or knowing someone who knows you, but it's clearly there. You are very well connected, as you each are in your own spheres. But building relationships, y'all are masters at that. And Fred, I always appreciate your sharing with our class, those tips, which I don't think we'll have time for today. We've also had a question about advice about leadership books to read. So that's sort of the rapid fire. I'm going to throw those kind of last three topics out there. And then along with that, strategic planning, which I think is just implicit in all of this. I think I've heard each of you say, I certainly agree. I wish I had been more strategic. Well, maybe not you, Fred. You seem to have kind of figured that out earlier on, maybe than us, but be strategic in our goal setting and our planning. So I'll let you take any one of those that each of you desire.
I'll jump in quickly, Leah. My advice about leadership, don't resist it. If the people around you recognize it in you, then there's something there, and you may not see it. You may not have confidence in yourself, but don't resist it, because the opportunities are amazing. Leadership is really hard, but it's very much worth it. Leadership books, y'all are going to laugh at this, but I swear this is true. And it's had more impact on my life than anything I probably ever read. Y'all are going to think I'm crazy, but when I was a kid, for my whole life, my mom read me the book about the little engine that could. And so for my whole life, I've thought, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And it has served me well. And if you have the kind of confidence that you think you can do it, you can do it. So again, leadership is hard, but it's worth it. And it's amazing to be able to serve as a leader and do things that make a difference in people's lives, whether it's in your law firm, for your clients, for your community, for the government, whatever. It's so critical. And I just encourage you all to not resist the opportunities that are going to be awaiting you.
I'll just jump in real quick with regard to building relationships. You know, of course, Fred worked for one of the people that was maybe the one of the greatest of that, and that is George H.W. Bush, who, you know, there are myriad examples and stories about how he nurtured relationships. In fact, there's been one going quite a bit this week about him showing up at LBJ's departure.
Yeah.
And I heard one of the talking heads talk about how they interviewed President Bush, and that picture where you can barely make out Bush. I mean, he didn't do this for grandiosity. He did it because of the relationship. It was on his desk. And so that's how important that moment was to him, the way he wrote notes. The reason I bring that up is because that is a great demonstration of empathy, which we kind of started this conversation with, and the key to relationships, in my opinion. And that may be why Fred mentioned it so early in our conversation, because that is a key to Fred. I mean, there's an empathy there and a desire to know the other person, and to work on that relationship and to make that part of it. Favorite books, you know, I've never been a big one on going out and buying a book that says leadership on the cover. Instead, I've always enjoyed learning from biographies and history, and trying to pick up leadership tips as part of that. One of my favorite books is a book called Lincoln at Gettysburg by Gary Willis. It's one of those books that by the end of the first page, I had chills, was working through that. And then I just finished a great book that my son had recommended to me. It's a book on Churchill called The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson. And it's just 1 year, and it's his first year when he became prime minister. And there's just a lot you can pick up about leadership qualities and approaches from that.
Yeah, we include Churchill in our leadership class. So thank you. Great example. Fred, wrap us up.
Well, that's a pretty heavy order there, Leah.
Give that closing you told us about.
Yeah, that was great fun. Books I'd recommend would fall into the category of, I agree with first of all with Kirk in terms of reading some good stuff about folks who actually stepped up to the plate. I think that you can find some good leadership readings in The 5 Dysfunctions of Teams, which is a good way to deal with relating to other people and the situations created by that. There's something relatively new in the market called Extreme Ownership, which is a really good piece that was written by a Marine. There's just a huge wide gamut in terms of the more information that you can absorb to give you ideas about the different qualities that successful leaders have been able to use. That's where I think there is some value to be gained. So the list can be very, very long. There's something I want to mention though, which I was thinking about in preparation for this. You know, there are the types of leaders that we are confronted with in life, or that we see in life, cover a pretty wide gamut. You know, some of them become the president of the United States. Some of them run major corporations, whether it's, Amazon or whether it's, Zuckerberg's outfit. There are also so many great leaders in our community, but you kind of got the style of a leader like Rosa Parks, who basically didn't have to open her mouth. She just sat down and refused to get up. And that one act resulted in a huge, huge focus shift in our country in terms of the way we view each other as individuals. Now her bust is sitting in the office of the President of the United States, but she just refused to get up. Or Martin Luther King sitting down at a drugstore counter. All of these individuals beginning to do things that allowed them to have an impact upon the people around them, and to move into a position of answering that question whether anything or anyone is better off as a result of their existence. If you can keep that as the foremost idea, I think, in your mind, I think that you'll find success in this space. Life's too complicated to be unintentional. It is way too complicated, way too big to be unintentional. So therefore, we need to be disciplined about being a part of the process and giving what we can to make this place a better place in which to live.
And that's
What a
why
beautiful,
the closings.
That's why he does the closing.
absolutely a beautiful way to end this. I hate to end this. I could go on and on and on for such a long time. Thank you again to our speakers. Thanks to all of you who have carved out to this 70 minutes in your day to spend with us. We appreciate all that each of you are doing to make a difference within your world. And with that, we will see you on another day.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Fred.
Thank you all. Great
Bye,
to be
Leah.
with you.